So I'm going to, first of all, I feel as always incredibly privileged. So I want to welcome Rabbi Josh Wander, um, and I want to give him the proper introduction. Josh Wander received his bachelor's degree in Talmudic law from a prestigious rabbinical college in Jerusalem. He then served as a commander in the IDF in Lebanon and officer in the United States Air Force Auxiliary. Before graduating from the University of Pittsburgh with a master's degree in public and international affairs and a global studies certificate in conflict resolution with a regional concentration in the Middle East. Politically in Israel, he served as an advisor in the Israeli parliament and as the online content editor and political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. In the US, he was the Republican nominee for mayor of Pittsburgh, a certified NRA instructor, and a range safety officer. He founded Jewish Preppers and has been featured in the National Geographic series Doomsday Preppers. Josh is married and lives with his 6 children on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, which is itself Mesiras Nefesh. He and his wife are active volunteers for the United Hatzalah and Zaka organizations, and we feel so privileged. Thank you so much, Josh. It's always.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's my privilege to be here, and I just have to differ with something that you said in your introduction, and that's the Mesiras Nefesh that's involved in living where I live. I think that it takes the really courageous ones are the Jews that are living outside of the land of Israel today. Those are the ones that really have the courage. I don't think that I'm courageous in any ways living where I'm living. In fact, maybe we'll show some show and tell during this talk. A few times ago, I go on speaking tours in the States. So a couple of years ago, I was on a tour, and I picked up this product, something that's unique to the United States. It's called the camo zuza. The camo zuza, if you haven't figured out yet what that is, let me open it up for you. I don't know if you can see it well, but the camo zuza is a device. You see that? It is a device that you put over your mezuzah in order to hide the fact that you're Jewish. So it looks like an alarm system, has a little blinking red light, and it looks like an alarm. It's called the camo zuza. So I don't know anyone in Israel that would ever have such a product as the camo zuza, but I guess some places in the United States today, it's that dangerous that you need such a product. Like I said, the Mesiras Nefesh are for the Jews that are still in the exile. Again, thank you, Naomi, for inviting me. Just a short introduction, I live in a very special place. The picture that's behind me is actually the picture that I get to see every morning when I wake up, when I look out my window. When people speak about the dangers of where I live, I always tell them, I don't know what you see when you open up your window in the morning, but this is my view over here. So I feel very privileged to live in such a special place, in such a special time. We're living in a very unique time in Jewish history. According to almost all opinions, we are at the end of days. We can discuss what that means, but we're at the end of days, and this is a time in which for thousands of years, Jews around the world have dreamed of being present in such a time, in such a place, and we are actually able to be here live in this generation, in this location, where, like I said, people have only dreamt about for millennia. The title of this talk, actually, I used sort of once before. Many years ago, I spoke in the Young Israel of Woodmere, I believe it was. And Rabbi Shai Shekhina asked me, what do I want to entitle the talk? So I said to him that, I thought for a minute, and then I said, maybe it's best to just entitle it The Building of Jerusalem and the Redemptive Process. But when I got up to speak, I said my real desire to name the talk was what we were calling the talk today, which is Moshiach is here. What are you going to do about it? And what do I mean by that? So some of the concepts I'm sure that I'm going to bring up tonight may sound unusual to some people, especially if you grew up in a mainstream Orthodox community in America, as I did. and you went to mainstream schools, if you went to a Beis Yaakov or you went to a yeshiva in America, you were taught what I refer to as, I've coined the idea of the MMM. So the MMM is the magical Moshiach moment. You're taught that, as I was, that at some point in the future, there's going to be this magic moment in which Mashiach is going to appear out of the blue. The Beis Hamikdash is going to fall out of the sky, and everybody's going to be transported al kanfei nesharim on the wings of eagles to Eretz Yisrael. This is the general mainstream way of thinking for Jews in the diaspora. And over the years, I have come to the realization that that is completely inconsistent with the way that Chazal have seen the redemptive process. The redemptive process is not something that happens in a magical moment. And this is something that potentially can change your entire worldview. The Yerushalmi in Meseches Brachos describes the redemptive process as kima. It's a slow process. The Rambam is very clear that this process is a natural process. This is not something that's going to happen in a magical moment. It's not something that we just have to sit back and wait for, as we will discuss. It is a process that it takes place over a long period of time. Many people have understood that this process is what we are living through today. The Vilna Gaon says on the pasuk, "V'yakir Yosef es echav v'hem lo hikiruhu," that Yosef recognized his brothers and they didn't recognize him. So he explains that in the times of the Geula is going to be happening all around us, and people are going to be oblivious to it. Indeed, we're living in the Geula, and most people even here are not aware of it, let alone across the exile. But indeed, we are living in the Geula. The Gemara speaks about a concept called Beis Meshichim. There are two different Mashiachs. I'm sure many of you have heard this concept before. There's a Mashiach ben Yosef and a Mashiach ben David. The Vilna Gaon understood that Mashiach ben Yosef is not a person. Mashiach ben Yosef is a process. It's a process that he believed began already in his lifetime. Hence, he himself tried to make Aliyah. He tried to come to Eretz Yisrael. He got as far as Amsterdam and had to turn back. We don't know exactly why, but he wrote during that trip his famous letter called the Igeres Agra that he wrote to his wife and his children. And the Baal Shem Tov, interestingly enough, 30 years before, did the same thing. He attempted to make Aliyah. He tried to come to Eretz Yisrael. He made it as far as Istanbul. Also had to turn around. It's not clear why. But both of them sent their students to Eretz Yisrael. And all that we have today in Eretz Yisrael is due to these two groups of Jews that were sent here 150 to 200 years ago. So this is what we understand is Mashiach ben Yosef, this process that has begun already, like I said, over a century ago and continues to this day. It leads up to the next stage, which is called Mashiach ben David. And that is a stage that we are getting very, very close to today. It's a stage, of course, Mashiach ben David is a person. It's a real person. It's a king. But that process is, the easier it is, how do I put this? The more that you are ready for this process to begin, the easier it will be. And the converse is also true, that the less ready you are for this process, the more difficult it will be. And that is something that I work daily on, trying to educate people around the world of this process and why it's important for them to be ready for it, because, like I said, that is what is going to make all the difference when the time comes. If you spoke to somebody a mere 80 years ago, and you told them that soon there is going to be a kibbutz galios, an ingathering of the exiles, with millions of Jews back in the land of Israel, There's going to be a Binyan Yerushalayim, a bustling city of over 1 million residents. They would look at you like you're insane. Today, we're living with these prophecies, these nevuahs unfolding before our eyes. And most people, like I said, are not aware of what they're seeing. But for the first time in 2,000 years, there are dozens of families of Kohanim that are living in and around the old city of Yerushalayim with bigdei kahuna inside their closets, ready to do the avodah on the Beis Hamikdash. We have dozens of kolim, including an art community here on the Mount of Olives, that study kodshim in order to instruct them. We have rebuilt all of the kelim of the Beis Hamikdash, with the exception of the one that cannot be rebuilt, which is the Aron HaBris, which was Nignaz, the Ark of the Covenant, was put into hiding 30 years before the destruction of the first temple. And for those that need to know where that's at, we know where that's at. We've refounded Tcheles. We're in the process of rebreeding the Paraduma. We're light years ahead of where we were just a few years ago. Just most people are not aware of what they're seeing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be where I assume where they are if they're in exile, where they would be where they are now. Like I said, this changes a person's entire worldview, because if you understand that the Geula is actually unfolding, not only is it unfolding right now, but you can be an active participant in this process by being here in Eretz Yisrael today, then it really begs for the question, why would you be in exile? There are many people that have this idea that we're supposed to sit back and wait for Moshiach. I believe that is also a mistaken idea. There was a time and place for that. In fact, it's famous. There's a famous Gemara that discusses the questions that are asked after a person passes away. There's a series of questions that are asked to a person after they passed away. And one of those questions famously is, Ha'im tzapita Yeshua, did you anticipate the redemption? Did you anticipate the Geula? And al Pidrash, I always say that I'm sure was the question that was asked for 2,000 years, because what else could you expect from someone that was living in a ghetto somewhere in Europe, someone whose entire life is stuck in a small ghetto? What can you expect from them to do but to open up a Sefer Tehillim and to daven that Mashiach should come? Fast forward to today, and there are practical steps that can be taken to bring the Geula about. And today, I think the question may have changed. It's no longer Ha'im tzapita Yeshua, did you anticipate the Geula? But it's Ha'im pa'alta Yeshua, did you do something to make it happen? Today, there are actual physical, concrete steps that we can take in order to bring the Geula. We're no longer stuck in ghettos where we can just open up a Sefer Tehillim. There's nothing wrong with reading Tehillim. But like I said, there are concrete steps, and we're going to talk a little bit about all of these projects that are going on today in Eretz Yisrael that are forwarding this goal. We're getting close to Purim. It's Adar, Baruch Hashem. And a lot of exciting things happen in the coming months in Adar, in Nisan. Last year, I spoke at CPAC in Washington. There's a group of, for those that don't know, of Jews that get together at CPAC, and they have a Shabbaton that weekend. So it was also right before Purim, and I told them over two different ideas. The first idea I said over was the story of the Purim of the Megillah. The Megillah starts off very nicely. As everyone knows, the Jews are doing very, very well in Shushan. They're very well connected. They're influential. They're even invited to the king's private party. And then all of a sudden, there's a twist in the plot. And the Megillah says, V'ha'ir Shushan nivocha, that the city of Shushan is nivocha. What is the word nivocha? So it's translated as perplexed, confused. There was once a great rabbi that asked the obvious question. What a strange adjective to use. You could imagine you wake up in the morning and you open up your newspaper, you turn on your phone, and you see that you're about to be wiped out, you're about to be annihilated, what kind of emotions would overcome you? You can imagine that you'd be upset, you'd be fearful, you'd be distraught. I can come up with a dozen different adjectives, but why would you be confused? That seems like it doesn't seem like the adjective that's needed to be used there. So I told them, this again was before the election, I said, the Jews of Shushan, like the Jews of America, they thought they had all the connections. They were connected to the Biden administration. They were connected to the Trump campaign. They were connected to Congress. They had Schumer Yisrael. They connected in the Senate. They had connections in the White House. They said this could never happen to us, right? How could this ever happen to us? We're so well connected. We're so influential. We're so connected. All of a sudden, like this, overnight, it was happening to them. Va'ir Shushan Nevocha, all of a sudden, all the Jews are in a state of confusion because they couldn't believe that just like that, this could be happening to them. They were shocked. They were confused. A couple months ago, I was at the Aguda convention in Stamford, Connecticut. And there was a session on Shabbos morning, 10 o'clock in the morning. Some people suggested that it was done purposely at 10 o'clock in the morning on Shabbos in order not to be recorded. I don't know if that's true or not. But there was a session, they called it Q&A, asked the rabbi, I'm not sure exactly what the name of the session was, with Rav Reuven Feinstein. And I spoke to the moderator, the rabbi was moderating the session, and he told me that you had to submit questions in advance. He told me that over 200 questions were submitted to this session, to ask the rabbi. He also told me that over 40% of those questions had to do with moving to Eretz Israel. Now, Aguda is not known as a Zionist organization, but over almost half of the questions that were asked of the rabbi were about picking up and moving to Eretz Israel. So that in itself is telling. Rav Reuven said unequivocally, he said, if you have parnasa today in Eretz Israel, he said you should get up and you should move immediately. There is absolutely no reason for a Jew to be in America today. He said, if you don't yet have parnasa in Eretz Israel, you should have a valid passport very close to you. That was a quote from him. We're living in times where I was a little bit afraid, to be honest with you. I was a supporter of Kamala Harris. I thought that she was the Aliyah candidate. If anyone can convince the Jews of America to leave, it was her. But that didn't happen. The Rebbeinu Shalom had other plans. And I was a little bit afraid that Achashverosh, I mean Trump, he was that he would allow the Jews of America to have a sigh, a breath of fresh air, and say, "Oh, we're good for another 4 years. We can sit back and we can relax." I have not gotten, Baruch Hashem, that feeling, and there are still many Jews that understand how precarious the situation is for Jews in America today, and more than ever, they are looking to come home, and we encourage them. I have an organization that's called Bring Them Home. Nothing to do with the hostages. We predated the hostages. But we are talking about the Jews that are in exile and how it's necessary today, more than ever, to get up and move home. In fact, I believe that, and I hope that those that are not here in Eretz Israel yet prove me wrong, but I believe that just like in Mitzrayim, that 80% of the Jews decided to stay in exile and they perished in the Makkah of Choshech. I think that we're going to see similar proportions this time around. I have no reason to believe that one of the fundamentals of our faith, which is that of free will, is going to be taken away from us in the end of days. And those people that choose to be in Eretz Yisrael at this special time will be here, and those that choose not to, they won't. It seems obvious to me, but to others, they sit back and they wait for Moshiach. The other thing I said over at CPAC from the Megillah was another Torah from the Vilna Gaon. He speaks about, I see somebody wrote, no Jew will be left behind. I'm happy to address that. I don't believe that's the case, but that is definitely a good song from Avram Fried. The Vilna Gaon says that there are two queens in the Megillah. Everybody's familiar with the two queens. One of those queens is Queen Vashti, and the other one is Queen Esther. And interestingly enough, the Vilna Gaon says that these two queens represent Klal Yisrael. Now, some people are surprised to hear that because they can understand how Queen Esther Malka, represents Klal Yisrael, but Vashti, how could it be that Vashti would be representing Klal Yisrael? And it's explained that there are two types of Jews. There's the segment of the Jewish population that is more like Vashti. Vashti was a passive queen. As we know, she was invited to the party. She decided to sit back. She wasn't interested in lifting a finger. She's just waiting. Well, Esther Malka was the proactive one. She understood that you had to do things in order to get things done. Likewise, there are two segments of the Jewish population. There are those that are like Esther Malka, and they're proactive, and they understand that we have to do things in order for the Gaula to happen. It doesn't happen automatically. There are steps that need to be taken in order for it to happen. And there are those that are like Vashti that are sitting back in places like Lakewood or Muncie or Borough Park or wherever they may be, Toronto, and they're saying, we're just going to wait here for Moshiach. We're going to be passive. So we hope that the Jewish people, there are more and more Jewish people that join the camp of Esther Malka and not of that of Vashti, and they understand that it's necessary to actually take action and not just sit back and wait. There are many projects, as I mentioned early on, that are being done as we speak here in Eretz Yisrael to bring the Gaula. In fact, I'm in the process of writing a book on the subject today. The book originally had the title Practical Gaula, a step-to-step guide to the final redemption. Until I met recently a friend of mine who is a rabbi in Lakewood, and I said, you know what? I know that haskamas are very important when you write a book. But to be honest with you, I'm not looking for any haskamas. Instead of having rabbis giving their haskama to my book, I'd much rather be banned in Lakewood. If you can get a ban, I'm sure my book will sell out. I'm sure everyone will buy it. So he gave me great advice. He said, why don't you just call the book Banned in Lakewood? So I'm debating now whether or not to call the book Banned in Lakewood or just to have someone ban it, but we'll figure it out. I have to say, and I don't mean to pick too much on Lakewood, although it's one of my favorite pastimes. I've taken thousands of people on tour here in Eretz Yisrael, and I start off the conversation always the same way. I say, where are you from? And they tell me they're from Muncie, they're from Borough Park, they're from Toronto. I say, really? There are Jews there? So sometimes they look at me like I'm from outer space. I don't know what's going on in the world. They say, of course there are Jews there. What do you mean? I say, well, what are they doing there? So I've noticed over the years, thousands of people that I've taken, 95% of the people answer more or less the same way. They say, that's a good question. What are we doing there? I've also noticed that about 5% get very, very defensive about this question. They say, what do you mean? What are we doing there? We're doing the same thing you're doing. Torah, mitzvahs. Every single one of these 5% is from Lakewood, New Jersey, so I'm not sure exactly what they feed them there, what kind of Kool-Aid they drink, but it seems to me that they have a different worldview than the entire Jewish world. I'm not sure exactly how to explain it, and I say that with much love because I have family that are there. There are many projects, like I've mentioned, that are going on right now. Amazing projects, because we're living in an amazing time, that are concrete steps, like I said, to bring the Gaula. I'm just going to mention a few of them, and each one of these projects we can elaborate on. Each one of these projects I probably can give a whole class about, several hours long. But each one is amazing in itself, and each one is a concrete step. When I tell people about these, most people have maybe heard of one, maybe two of these projects out of the at least couple dozen that are going on at the time. And each one of them, like I said, is absolutely incredible. And it's incredible that we're living in such a time that we can witness them. So, you know, one of those projects is we're actually building the Beis HaMikdash. Most people are not aware of this, and this may be shocking to some. But the mitzvah to build a Beis Hamikdash is actually a mitzvah. It's one of the 613 Taryag mitzvahs in the Torah. Va'asuli mikdash, we just had it in the parsha. Va'asuli mikdash. Unfortunately, many people, as I did, grow up in America, and they're often taught that this mitzvah is whenever you do a good deed, whenever you do a mitzvah, that's like building a brick in the Beis Hamikdash. So it's very nice. It might be a good song for Avram Fried. I don't know if he sings about that. But what I can tell you is that that is not the mitzvah, right? According to any one of the Rishonim, according to any of Chazal, no one says that that is the mitzvah. The mitzvah of Asul Mikdash is for us to physically build a concrete structure, right? What you sing behind me, right on the Har HaBayis, right in the Mokum HaMikdash. That is the mitzvah. And there are groups of Jews that are actually doing this today, believe it or not. In fact, there is an entire quarry in an undisclosed location in the Upper Shomron, where they are quarrying the stones to build the Beis Hamikdash. This is done with the consulting the great rabbis of our time, and it's not a well-known one of the projects that's not less well-known, I should say. When I go on speaking tours, I take with me a what I call show and tell kit. And it's one thing to show pictures to people of the stones that are actually being built to build a Beis Hamikdash, but it's a completely different thing when it comes to feeling something concrete in your hands, something tangible. So I checked with El Al, and it turns out that these stones, I wanted to bring one of the stones with me, but the stones are a couple tons each, and it was above my baggage allowance. So I had to figure out another way to show this to people. So I asked the project manager, can you do me a favor and can you build me a Kiddush cup made out of the same stone that you're building the Beis Hamikdash? And this is what they came up with. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a Kiddush cup that I use on Shabbos. Oh, I don't know if it's working, but it's a Kiddush cup I use on Shabbos. It's made out of the same stone that we're building the Beis Hamikdash stones with. And this is what I take with me when I travel to show people that this is a real thing. This is tangible. You can feel it. I also get to teach, by the way, at the same time, how the Kohanim use stoneware. Why they use stoneware is because it's not Mekabel Tuma. So that's an important thing. Again, we're not going to discuss those laws right today, but it's an important law to understand. One of the projects. Another project we mentioned before, Big Day Kahuna. There are groups of women that what they do is they spend their time actually creating the Big Day Kahuna. The Big Day Kahuna, by the way, just in case you don't know, have to be custom made. So each Kohen has to be measured and it has to fit them perfectly. And the science, the technique, the skill that is used for creating the Big Day Kahuna is something that is taken many years of study, and they've studied it. And it also requires us learning about certain specific dyes that are mentioned in the Torah. So another one of my kit of my, let's see if we can see this on the camera. So I'm not sure this will come out properly, but this is a sample of 3 of the original dyes in the Torah. One of them is Tcheles, one of them is Argaman, and the other is Tolah Shani. Now, if on the camera, I'm not sure you'll be able to see the difference between the Tolah Shani and the Argaman because they're similar. One's like a maroon color, and the other is a little bit more orangish. But they're 3 separate colors, and each of these dyes are used not only for the Big Day Kahuna, and by the way, this is meant to look like the Rimon V'Pa'amon that's on the Me'il of the Kohen Gadol. It's not obviously one of those, but it's just meant to look like that. These dyes are essential for the building of the Beis Hamikdash, for the Paroches, for the Big Day Kahuna. In fact, that was probably the first project that was taken on. The first project that was taken on, if you're familiar with the concept of Tcheles, was the Redziner Rebbe. The Redziner Rebbe in Europe did something which was completely unprecedented at the time. He, as a Hasidic Rebbe, only speaking Yiddish with his Hasidim, he understood that it was necessary to find Tcheles, because Tcheles is one of those things that's needed for the Geula to happen. Again, we need to take concrete steps. So he made it his life's mission to find the Tcheles, the Chilazon, the original Tcheles. He taught himself Italian, and he got up and he went on a trip to Italy, where at the time they had a national aquarium. The National Aquarium was considered to be one of the biggest in the world. And he figured that if anyone, any scientist of the time could describe to him, could identify exactly what the chilazon is, it would be these scientists that study, I don't know if zoology is the right word. I'm sure there's something specific with fish, but sea creatures, they study sea creatures and they would know what it is. And he picked himself up and he traveled to Italy, taught himself Italian, and spoke to these scientists who unfortunately misled him. And they told him that the only sea creature that could create this dye is a cuttlefish. It's a type of squid. And he, even though it's not mashma, it didn't seem that way from the sources that it's a squid. It seems very clear that a chilazon is a snail. It's not a squid. But he took their word for it. And he decided that he has found the tcheles, he has found this cuttlefish, which I'll thank you very much, ichthyology. I don't know how to pronounce that, but thank you very much, the study of fish. So he decided he's going to bring this back, and he started creating tcheles from this dye, which his Hasidim to this day use. In fact, the chief rabbi for the first time in history, the chief rabbi of Israel, who is an anical, he's a descendant of the Riziner Rebbe, continues to this day to wear his tcheles. Some Breslevers also use it, but it's not so popular today. And the reason is that many years later, the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel, Rav Herzog, who was formerly the chief rabbi of Ireland, he decided to write his doctoral thesis on the subject of the Riziner Rebbe's finding of the tcheles and explain why he was misled and how the cuttlefish is actually not the real tcheles, that it's called the Murex trunculus. It's a type of snail. I actually have one in the other room, but I'll for show and tell, but when you come, I'll show it to you. And that is the actual tcheles. And that has been accepted by most people today. Those that you see wearing tcheles today are generally wearing this from this snail, the Murex trunculus. I could tell you a personal story that happened to me. I was working in the Knesset many years ago when the president of Israel was Chaim Herzog, the son of the former chief rabbi that we just mentioned. Chaim Herzog was not a religious Jew, but he was a very knowledgeable Jew. It was the end of his end of the years. In fact, I think he passed away that year. And I was fortunate enough to be, my Rebbe, Reb Hershel Shekhina, was one of the ones that had the first pairs of tcheles. I think there was first 12 pairs that were made. And I was fortunate enough to get from the second batch was I think it was 200 that were made after that. And we're going back about 35 years ago. So I'm wearing the tcheles. Again, at the time, nobody wore these tcheles. I wore them inside my pants and nobody knew better. And I bump into the president, Chaim Herzog, and I figure this is a great opportunity to breach the subject with him. And I pull out my tzitzis from my pants and I show him the tcheles. And I said to him, President, you should know that it's in the schus of your father that I'm wearing these. I wasn't at the time even sure that he knew what they were, but he broke down in tears. He couldn't believe that anyone even knew about his father's doctoral thesis, let alone put it into practice. But it was indeed put into practice, and today there are tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of Jews around the world that are wearing tcheles as a result. Again, parochis is part of this process as well. They're building the parochis. There's a person that's building actually the woodwork for the Beis Hamikdash. For those that don't know, many years ago, in fact, going back to the Six-Day War in 1967, there's actually an architect, a famous architect, that wrote up the whole blueprints for the third Beis Hamikdash, including all the modern modern technology. It has in it, a sewage system, a modern sewage system. It has electricity. It has lighting. I don't think it has Wi-Fi, but it has everything that a modern structure would have. And there's no reason to believe that it won't have all this modern technology. We have 5 parei aduma, 5 red heifers that have been imported from Texas several years ago, and they are currently in the city of Shiloh in the Shomron. One can go there and you can see them. Also part of the process. I should mention at this point that we actually have a conference every year on the subject of the parei aduma. It's a fascinating subject. There's a kollel that actually studies under Rav Azaria Ariel, studies the parei aduma. And every year they have a conference in which they present what they've studied over the past year. And this past year, we had a conference. It's on Parshas Chukas, the parsha in the Torah that talks about parei aduma. And the first rabbi to get up to speak, his name is Rav Moreno. Somebody from here in the Old City, very special tzaddik. Many of you probably are not familiar with that name, but for Israelis, that is a very, very famous name. In fact, his brother, Emmanuel Moreno, Hashem Yikom Damo, was probably the most famous Israeli soldier of all times, maybe him and Yoni Netanyahu. His brother was killed in Lebanon. He was the commander of the Sayeret Matkal, the most elite unit in the IDF. And he is the only soldier to this day that they're not allowed to publish his picture, even though he's passed away. They're still not allowed to publish his picture because he was involved in so many top secret missions that it might compromise some of these missions, and they're not allowed to publish his picture. Anyway, his brother is a very special rabbi here in the Old City, and he was the first one to speak at this conference. And he started off telling a mashal. He said like this. He said, imagine that you meet somebody that is studying for their driver's permit. They have a manual in front of them, and it has all the laws. They're learning the lights, they're learning the lines, they're learning the rules of the road. And they're very busy studying. And you see that they go on and they take their test and they pass. Subsequently, they go and they take their driver's test, and that too they pass, and they get their driver's license. At that point, you split up from the person. A couple months, a couple years go by, and you come back and you bump into this person and you see that he's not driving a car. Not only isn't he driving a car, but he's still sitting there with the driver's permit manual studying the laws, the theory. We call it teoria here in Israel. And you're shocked. You say, what's going on? I know you have a driver's license. Why aren't you driving a car? And he says to you, drive a car? He says, I haven't been behind the wheel of a car in 2,000 years. I can't just start driving a car. He says that's the difference between the Jews that are in exile and the Jews that are in Eretz Israel. The Jews that are in exile are very busy learning the theory, but they're afraid to put it into practice. He says, Baruch Hashem, we're living in a time and a place where we can not only just learn the theory, but we can put all these things into actual practice, which is what we're doing today with the parei aduma. Har HaBayis. This is a controversial subject. I don't shy away from controversy, and I'm happy to discuss any questions about it. But for those that are not aware, which most are not, a decade ago, there were a couple thousand crazy Jews, let's call them, that went up to the Har HaBayis. Today, as of today, this past year, there were over 60,000 religious Jews that go up to the Har HaBayis. Now, out of these Jews that go up to the Har HaBayis, there has been a revolution, no less than a revolution, that has gone on since Tisha B'Av of this year. Again, most people that live in the diaspora, in exile, they probably are not familiar with this concept. Again, I'm happy to discuss it. But a revolution has happened. If you went up to the Har HaBayis last year and you moved your lips, just moved your lips, they would say you're praying. They would immediately, the police would come, they would arrest you with the waqf, with the Islamic waqf. They would take you and they would take you off, they would whisk you off the mount. Fast forward to Tisha B'Av of this year, Everybody ready for this? As of today, there are daily minyanim happening on the Har Bayis. Shachris, Mincha, every single day, there are multiple minyanim. I was fortunate enough to be one of the first people to go up the Rosh Hashanah of this year. We davened the entire Rosh Hashanah davening on the Har Bayis. We did 13 hishtachavayos. Again, people that are living in exile, it's hard to understand these things, but these are concepts that have been lost to the Jewish people. We'll talk about that too soon. Hishtachavaya, pishut yadayim reglaim, is prostrating yourself with your hands and your feet on the ground, which is something which is prohibited. It's also to do on the stone anywhere in the world except for on the Har Bayis. There it is, not only is it allowed, but it's a mitzvah. It's one of the avodas is prostration on the Har Bayis. We imagine the power, the powerful scene of having our first group, 50 Jews, go up right after Nates on Rosh Hashanah, and 50 Jews dropping to the ground, prostrating themselves on the ground. But not only that, but for the first time in probably thousands of years, we blew all the tekiyas of the shofar and chatzotzros, but we'll discuss soon also, on the Har Bayis. Things are happening today. There's a beis medrash there. There's a yeshiva that studies there every day. There is a kollel that studies there every day. There's a midrashah that studies there every day. It is just no less than a revolution what has just gone on in the past few months. And again, it's something that's happening completely under the radar because most people, most Jews in the world are completely oblivious to what is happening. But it is a revolution, and indeed it is happening in our lifetime. I mentioned the chatzotzros. It's important for me to mention that because there are 613 Taryag mitzvos in the Torah. Out of the 613 mitzvos in the Torah, many of these mitzvos, many of us can't do. If you're living in exile, if you're living in the diaspora, then about 1/3 of those mitzvos are already mitzvos you can't do. So imagine that. A person that is not living in Eretz Yisrael today, almost 1/3 of the Torah, they're already neglecting. Right? There's about 1/3 of the mitzvahs can't be done outside of Eretz Yisrael. Of the other mitzvos, there are many mitzvos that apply to specific people. So somebody mentioned Rina Ariel. Yes, absolutely. Rina's amazing. In fact, her sister is one of our neighbors here in Har Zaysim. Out of the mitzvos, there are some mitzvos which are for specific people, for a man, for a woman. There are mitzvos in the Torah that are for a Kohen, for a Levi. Some are only Bizman HaMikdash in certain times. There are mitzvos we prefer not to do. Right? There's a mitzvah, believe it or not, to divorce your wife. Right? We try not to divorce our wives. But if someone has to get divorced, there's a process. There's a mitzvah of Girushin. There's a mitzvah chalitza. There's mitzvahs we prefer not to do, but if we get into such a situation, there are mitzvahs that apply. And likewise, there are many mitzvahs in the Torah that have just been neglected, have been forgotten over thousands of years of exile. Out of thousands of years of Gaulus, we've forgotten a lot of mitzvahs. The best example I like to give is somebody that's buried here in Har Zaysim. Many of you may or may not have heard of him. His name was Yosef Rosenberger. A couple generations ago in the United States, maybe you know about this or maybe you don't, the mitzvah of shatnez was forgotten. The practical mitzvah, meaning people learned about the mitzvah, that there's such a mitzvah, but nobody took it seriously that this is a practical mitzvah. This individual, Rav Yosef Rosenberger, did something which was unbelievable. He opened the first shatnez laboratory in Williamsburg, and he went around his entire life speaking around the world about the mitzvah of shatnez, and literally revived the mitzvah to the Jewish people. The reason that we have shatnez today is because of this person, Yosef Rosenberger. Likewise, I have attempted since the beginning of the war to revive one of the mitzvahs that have been lost in the Torah. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that b'shas milchama, when one goes to war, and be'es tzara, when there's a time of trouble, it is a mitzvah to take 2 silver trumpets, what are known as chatzotzros, and to blow them. It's a mitzvah in the Torah, one of the 613 mitzvahs. Again, show and tell here. This is, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but this is a chatzotzra, right? This is one of the chatzotzras. It is made of pure silver, And my set that I keep in the car has traveled with me. It's gone to Lebanon, it's gone to Gaza with the soldiers, and it's been blown in many of the battles, before many of the battles that we've fought here. There is actually a group, I should mention, in the old city of Jerusalem today, that since the beginning of the war, they fast every single Monday and Thursday. And at Nates, when they have their minyan on Shacharis, before one of the gates of the Harabayas, they blow the Chatzotros. And again, right before Shkia, they have another minyan in the Kotel tunnels, and they also blow the Chatzotros. The Chatzotros is a mitzvah. I've written a book on the subject. I don't have it with me here, but there's a book called Chatzotros, also dealing with this idea of reviving this mitzvah to the Jewish people. There's actually a theme. Again, this is a whole discussion, but there's a theme throughout Jewish history of the rabbis discussing why aren't we performing this mitzvah today. In fact, the Mishnah Brura, the Chavetz Chaim, mentions in Hilchas Tainus that he says, perhaps it's because we don't live in Eretz Yisrael that we're not blowing the Chatzotros. And he says, even if we lived in Eretz Yisrael, we don't have a Jewish government. Maybe that's why we're not blowing Chatzotros today. So today we don't have these excuses. We living in Eretz Yisrael, we have a Jewish government. They really don't have these excuses anymore. And again, we are at a time of war, or at a time of trouble for the Jewish people. And this is one of the mitzvahs we're trying to revive to the Jewish people. We're trying to bring all the mitzvahs back. That is the goal. That is what is bringing the Gaula, is bringing the mitzvahs back to life. There are schools that teach Kohanim. There are schools that actually go through all the service, all the avoda that's in the Beis Hamikdash, and they're teaching on a daily basis the Kohanim how to do these things. We have a mock Mizbeach somewhere in the Judean desert, and they actually run up and down the Mizbeach, and they learn how to do the avoda. We have a music school for Levium. Believe it or not, we have Levium that study how to sing in the Beis Hamikdash, and we get together and we study these laws and these songs. Again, we're living in incredible times. Even if it's not known to most people, there are even municipal projects here in Yerushalayim, which are clearly, for those that can see or are sensitive to what's happening, clearly the infrastructure for the Olei L'Regel. Millions of Jews have to come here 3 times a year. They have to come to Yerushalayim. They have to come to, by the way, I should mention, Rav Meir Kahana used to say that twice a year, Jews around the world look up to the heavens and they raise their hands and they say and they speak and they lie in the face of God. What do they say on Pesach night and on after Yom Kippur? They say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year we should be in Jerusalem. And they know very well that they have no interest in being next year in Yerushalayim. Hopefully, those they'll wake up and they'll come home. But there are many Jews, unfortunately, that are not ready to get up and move for whatever reasons. And we can discuss it at another time. But the infrastructure is being created for the Olei L'Regel. There is a cable car system that is being built. You can see it today. It's being built here in Yerushalayim that is going to bring 3,000 Jews an hour to the Kosel Plaza. There's a whole network of light rails that are being extended in every direction here in Yerushalayim. There's a fast train that's coming from the airport in 20 minutes to Yerushalayim. All this is part of that infrastructure that is being built. The question is whether we can see it. That's what we daven every day. V'sechazena einenu. Hashem should open up our eyes to see the geula that's unfolding before our eyes. Again, some people think that we're just supposed to sit back and wait for Moshiach. I think they're wrong for many reasons. There was once a Hasidic Rebbe that said during our davening, during Shemona Esrei every day, we say 3 brachas. We say the bracha Rifa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafeh. We daven that all the sick people should have a refuah. And then we daven Barech Aleinu es Hashon Hazos. We daven for Panosa. And finally we daven Tikah b'Shofar Gadol. We daven for the Geula. The Rebbe said, it's amazing. He says, Hasidim come to him every day for eitzas, and they ask him questions. He said, never did it happen that a chassid came to me and said to me, Rebbe, I'm very, very sick. Do you think I should go see a doctor? Never happened. said, never did it happen that a chassid came to me and said, Rebbe, I'm very poor. I don't have any money. I can't afford it. I can't feed my family. I can't feed my children. Do you think I should go look for a job? Never happened. But for some reason, when it comes to the Geula, when it comes to the Kabbah Shofar Gadol, people are coming to me and they say, Rebbe, should we do something to make the Geula happen? Clearly, just like you have to do ishtadlis when it comes to refuah, when it comes to parnasa, likewise we have an obligation to do ishtadlis when it comes to the Geula. Today we're living in, again, a very special time where Israel is, for the first time in 10 out of 12 of the tribal lands, right now that we have entered into Asher and Naphtali in Lebanon and in Syria. We're just missing two of the tribes that are of Reuven and Gad that are on the Ever Yarden, that are in what they call Jordan today. And so we'll have those back too. So we're in gathering the exiles. We're bringing together Jews from around the world, these lost tribes that have been lost around the world. We're seeing them appear here in Eretz Israel, whether it be the Ethiopian Jewry that have a tradition that they come from the Shevet of Dan, whether it be the Bnei Menashe, this tribe from India that has come that have a tradition that they come from the tribe of Menashe. The tribes are coming home. Baruch Hashem, we're seeing the tribes come home. We're witnessing the ingathering of the exiles. In fact, that's what is obvious to many people. When it says Al Kanfei Nisharim, that the Jews are going to come back on the wings of eagles, it's obvious that that doesn't actually, it's not a literal thing that we're going to come back on the wings of eagles. It means airplanes. My wife comes from a Yemenite family, and when the Jews of Yemen were they never saw airplanes before, in some of the smaller villages, when the airplanes came to pick them up and bring them there to Israel, they understood this is a fulfillment of the prophecy. This is the nevuah. Al Kanfei Nisharim. These are interestingly enough, El Al, its parent company, it was bought out, and its parent company is Wings of Eagles, right? That's actually what it's called, Wings of Eagles. We're watching these things again just to be sensitive and understand that many of the things that are spoken about in Chazal that could not have been understood years ago. In fact, that's what the Rambam says. Many Mefarshim explain that we're not going to be able to understand the Geula until it happens. We have to first see it happen, and then we'll understand it. How could you explain? I'll give you some examples. It says that before Moshiach comes, that there's going to be a time that even the smallest pruta, the smallest coin, is not going to be found in a person's pocket. And it was understood for years when people are learning this. It is understood that what that meant was that we're going to live in a generation of people are going to be so poor that they're not even going to have a penny in their pocket. How would they have known that there was such a thing as Apple Pay? How would they have known that there was such a thing as credit cards? How would they know that people were moving towards a cryptocurrency, some sort of digital currency? We're going to live in a generation in which there's not going to be coins in the pocket. In fact, Trump just was helping fulfill this nevuah by getting rid of the penny, right? The idea that there's not going to be a pruta anymore. So of course, nobody's going to have a pruta in their pocket, right? This is something we couldn't have understood years ago, but we're watching it happen. We understand now how what this means. There are so many examples of this. When Ezra came back, he came back with 42,360 Jews to rebuild the second temple, the second Beis HaMikdash. When the Jews came back to build the second Beis HaMikdash, so I always tell people, if you go to Ben Gurion Airport today, Ben Gurion Airport facilitates, on an average day, 50,000 people. On a peak day, it's 100,000. That means in one day, we're bringing back more Jews than the entire return of Gaula's Bavel. People just don't understand the enormity of what they're seeing. Again, if they understood the enormity of what they're seeing, I assume they wouldn't be in exile. Again, it's another conversation, what it means to be in exile. We have to define our terms, just like we have when we speak about Moshiach, we have to define our terms. When we talk about Gaulus, we also have to define our terms. When people say to me, you're also in Gaulus, Eretz Yisrael is also Gaulus, there's no difference, I completely reject that idea. To me, how I define Gaulus is a location. If one is where they're supposed to be, the Jewish people are in Eretz Yisrael, they're not in Gaulus. If they're not where they're supposed to be, then they are in Gaulus. That's what Gaulus means. We've been taken out of Eretz Yisrael, we've been sent into exile. I understand that there's no Beis Hamikdash behind me yet. It's going to be there soon, but it's not there yet. And I would understand if somebody says that what it says in Kabbalah, that Shekhina begalusa, the Shekhina is in Galus. I understand that it's a process. Like I said, like I started off, we started off speaking about a process. The process is that first we have to get the Jews out of Galus. We have to get the Jews out of the exile. We have to bring them to Eretz Israel. And over time, then the Shekhina also will come back to Eretz Israel, and it will it also leave the Galus. In fact, that is a Gemara. The Gemara says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it says in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Bo'ra'u, come and see, Kama Chavivin Yisrael Lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. See how endeared are the Jewish people to Hashem. How do we know we're so endeared to Hashem? So the Gemara says, Bechol makom shegalu, in every place we went into exile, Shekhina imohim, the Shekhina went with us. The Shekhina joined us in exile wherever we went. And it brings three examples. It says we went into the Gaulus in Mitzrayim. Shekhina imohim, the Shekhina went with us. And it brings a pasuk to explain that. Then it says we went into Gaulus in Bavel. Likewise, the Shekhina went with us. And again it brings a pasuk to prove that point. Finally, it says La'asidin, that in the future, it says that we're going to go into Gaulus, and the final exile, we're going to go into Gaulus. Shekhina Aman, the Shekhina is going to be with us. And it brings a pasuk, Shne'emar v'shov Hashem Elokecha shvuscha. When I learned this Gemara with my children, so I said to them, what it sounds to me is that the Jews that are living in the diaspora today, they're actually holding back Moshiach. Why? Because wherever the Jews are, the Shekhina has to be there. So if they're over there, the Shekhina is stuck over there. So I once had the courage to breach this subject with my Rebbe. My Rebbe, again, is Rav Hershel Schachter. He lives in Washington Heights currently. Who am I to tell my Rebbe that he's holding back Mashiach? But I explained to him what I thought the Gemara says. I said, what do you think, Rebbe? This is what I understand, that the Jews that are in Golus are holding back Mashiach. So he said to me, Josh, you're learning the Gemara wrong. I said, how so, Rebbe? He said to me, who says that the Shekhina is in America today? I said, Rebbe, what do you mean? That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara says that B'chol makom shgalu, in every place we went to Gaula, Shekhina went, the Shekhina went with us. He says, no, Josh, that was talking before the Jews had the opportunity and came back to Eretz Israel. He says, Baruch Hashem, we're living in a generation where the Jews have come back to Eretz Israel. He says that there's no Shekhina left in America today. What he was saying was actually a lot more radical than what I was saying. I was just saying that the Jews in America are holding the Shekhina hostage. He's saying there is no Shekhina left in America today. The Shekhina is gone. The Shekhina has come back to Eretz Israel. In fact, the Bnei Yissaschar, a famous Hasidic Rebbe, says something similar. He says that with the Shekhina that's in Golus also comes a shmira, comes a protection. At the end of days, he says there's going to come a time in which the Shekhina is going to leave Chutz La'aretz, is going to leave the Golus, and that shmira is also going to leave with it. So it's going to be a very, very tenuous, a very dangerous time for the Jewish people, because that shmira that comes along with the Shekhina being there is also going to leave and is going to come back to Eretz Israel. So we're living in these incredible times. I see my time is running up. I try to be careful with my time. And I'm told also that I'm supposed to open up for some questions. I'm sure you have some questions. There are so many more things to discuss. I just want to say one last thing, and that is that our brave soldiers here. I have 3 children that are currently serving, a 4th on the way, and it's never an easy time. I've been serving in the IDF for 35 years, and without going into too much detail, I had the second, what I consider to be the second hardest job in the Army during this war, and that was recovering and identifying all the bodies of the victims. I believe the hardest job was those that had to go to the families and tell them that their children are no longer with us. But I've noticed something very interesting. There is a revival within the Jewish people here in Eretz Israel, specifically within the army. The army, the soldiers that are going to army, whether they be religious, whether they be less religious, they all understand that there's something that's going on here. It's obvious. It's so obvious. And they're a little bit disturbed. Why are they disturbed? Because those soldiers that are going into the Gaza Strip, they're walking into the schools, they're walking into the government buildings, they're walking into people's private homes. And over and over and over again, what do they see? As soon as they walk into a home or a building or a school, they see a picture behind us over here, of the Dome of the Rock or Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's what they see. In fact, that's what Hamas calls this whole war. Al-Aqsa waves. They call it after the Temple Mount, after our Har HaBayis. They understand that our enemy has a vision. They know exactly what they're after. And they wonder to themselves, do we know? IDF soldiers, do we know do we have a clear vision like our enemies do? So it happens to be, I don't know if you can see this, but this patch, it's an unofficial patch, but it is a patch, the most desired patch, the most in-demand patch today in the army, is a patch of the Beis HaMikdash. Because our soldiers, again, whether they be religious or not, understand that we have to have a vision. It's not enough for just our enemies to have a vision. We too need to have a vision. And I'll just end off by saying that I was speaking in a seminary a couple months ago. I don't remember exactly what it was. And I told them like this. I told them that they're very fortunate to be here in Eretz Israel, learning at this and being here at this very special time. And I told them over from a very special rabbi, Rabbi Nachman Kahana, who I have had the deep fortune of davening with for 3 decades and hosting one of his shows on podcasts. He used to tell that he made Aliyah in 1962. And he used to tell about how it was here in Eretz Israel in 1967, prior to the Six-Day War. He said it was a very, very scary time. They were talking about a second Holocaust. They anticipated the armies of the Arab armies coming and wiping out Eretz Israel. They were digging thousands of graves, preparing for the onslaught of these Arab armies. And he said that many, maybe most, Jews that had a second passport, they were lining up in the airport to escape. I witnessed the same exact thing happen in 1991 during the first Gulf War. Even though all the rabbis at the time, from Rav Shach to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, said that the American yeshiva students should stay and they should stay in yeshivas, they shouldn't leave, they were lining up in the airport to run away. So Rav Nachman asked the question. He says, what was their punishment? What was their punishment that they abandoned Eretz in its time of need? And he said the punishment was that they weren't here to see the miracles. Those that were here watched day after day as the miracles unfolded before their eyes. While the ones that ran away, so they got to hear it on the news, but they weren't here to see it. They weren't here to watch it happen. They weren't here when it really counted. In fact, it was a few months ago, I don't remember if Nomi was at the Kiddush at the time, but a few months ago, there was a rocket that came over the Kiddush and exploded above the Kiddush that we have on Shabbos in the Old City, on one of the rooftops of the Old City. And after the explosion, everybody started clapping and continued eating. And I turned to a guest of mine who happened to be from the 5 towns and in charge of security of one of the shuls there. And I said that what would be the reaction in your shul in the 5 towns if you were having this outdoor event, this big kiddush, and all of a sudden a rocket came above you, it exploded above you? He said there would be pandemonium. He said people would be hysterical. They'd be running and screaming in every direction. I said, look at the difference. I said, here we enjoy the fireworks. We all clap. Okay, and we continue eating. I said, we're so used to the miracles here that it doesn't even, we don't even appreciate it anymore. Tens of thousands of rockets have fallen on Eretz Israel since the beginning of this war. And each one of them has the potential of the destruction that we saw in Majd al-Shams, that we saw in the Golani base. Tens of thousands of miracles are happening. We're watching it happen. It's just incredible times. And again, I just want to finish with one thought. I was supposed to be last month in Baltimore speaking in a number of shuls, and it was supposed to be at the inauguration. President Trump was kind enough to cancel it for me, the public part of it. And unfortunately, right beforehand, my wife was having trouble with her vision. And she went to one eye doctor and another eye doctor, and one after another told her, there's nothing wrong with your eyes. And eventually they sent her to do a CT scan, and they found that she had a very large tumor in her brain. Baruch Hashem, it wasn't cancerous, and she works in the hospital, so they rushed her into surgery with the best doctors and had it removed. She's in recovery, Baruch Hashem. But I got to do something which hasn't been done in thousands of years, and I'll finish with this. Those that are familiar with the concept of the Har Bayis, that are learning the rules. By the way, I think this is to me, it's hard to understand Jews that are learning in, I don't know, Lakewood and BMG or wherever they're learning around the world. And you really believe, you say, Ani Mamin every day, Mashiach's going to come today. If Mashiach's going to come, what are you going to do? Do you know all the halachas of kodshim, of taharos? Like, how would you even know what to do with your life? Like I said, a third of the mitzvahs are foreign to you because you've never performed them. What are you going to do when Mashiach comes? Let's say Mashiach comes today. How are you going to know what to do? To me, it's obvious that you need to learn these things in advance. The Chavetz Chaim made it very clear you need to do it. Anyways, the halacha is very clear that anyone that goes up to the Har Bayis, the Mishnah Midos, the Brisa in Smacha says that you go up to the Har Bayis. Most people entered from the southern gates, what are known as Shari Chulda, Chulda being one of the 7 Nevios. Millions of Jews would be Ola L'Regel through those gates. As soon as you get up onto the Har Bayis, Mekif Yamin, everybody turns right. It's a one-way path. Everybody has to turn right as soon as they get onto the Har Bayis. There's an exception to the rule. 4 types of people. The Brisa says that there are 4 types of people. One is a Ovel, Lo Aleinu, somebody who's lost a member of their family, of their immediate family. One is somebody who has a chola, somebody who has a sick person in their home. The third one is a menuda, somebody who has been put into cherem, into excommunication. And the fourth one is someone who's lost a very valuable item, an aveda. These 4 people are the exception to the rule. When they go onto the Har Bayis, instead of turning right, they have to turn left. They turn the wrong way. So I was fortunate enough to have special permission from the head of the police when I heard the news about my wife to go up to the Har Bayis and to make a left. I went the wrong way. I got special escort going to the left. As all the Jews were turning to the right, I turned to the left. And exactly what the Brisa that was written thousands of years ago, exactly what it says, that's what happened. As all the Jews are going one way, and you're coming around the other way, at some point you meet, and everybody looks at you. What's wrong with you? What's going? Don't you know? Don't you know that everybody has to turn right? Why are you turning left? And then you explain to them why you're turning left. You say what your issue is, and they say a special bracha. Mi sheshachem b'makom hazeh, the one that dwells in this place should resolve whatever your issue is. If it's because you're an ovel or you're a chola, or whatever this issue is. So that's exactly what happened. I was turning left. Everybody else was turning right. We bumped into each other. Everybody's looking at me like I'm from outer space. What's going on? Why are you going the wrong way? Wrong direction on a one-way road? And I explained my wife is very, very ill. And they all together said the bracha, Mi sheshachem b'makom hazeh, the one that dwells in this place should give a refuah to your wife. So again, we're fortunate enough to be living in this very special times where we can reenact, we can bring back these practices that have been lost to the Jewish people over thousands of years of Gaulas. I'm happy to open up the floor for questions if anyone has any, or I'll let Nomi to moderate or however it works.
Yeah, so I see we're losing, it's late, we're losing a lot of people. Josh, I want to ask you something. The concept of the 2 the parts of Lebanon that we took over and the parts of Syria, which has increased the 2 areas of the Shvatim, are those going to stay in Israeli hands? Do we know if that's going to be given away again, or do we know if it's going to stay, if the intent is for it to stay in Israel, within Israel proper?
I always tell people I'm not a Navi, but at least I'm in the country that is privy to having Nevuah. So at least I have some concept of Nevuah, even if I'm not a Navi. I have no idea. I'm not privy to the inner workings, the secrets of the IDF. Of course, it will be in our hands. The question is whether it's going to be given away and then brought back. That unfortunately, that happens over and over again in our history, that we keep giving away different territories of Eretz Israel, and we have to fight to get them back. I hope that's not the case. I don't know what is going to happen, but I can tell you that it is quite miraculous. No one could have imagined a couple months ago that we would be in a position where the IDF would be taking over Syria without one bullet shot. If you said that to somebody for the past 30 years, if you said that would happen, well, all of a sudden, guess what? The IDF is going to take over Syria, and nobody's going to have to fight. They would think you're crazy. Again, we're so fortunate to be watching this. Again, it's the miracles that are happening. How it happens, the Rebbeinu Shem has his own way of doing things, and again, we have to do our ishtadlus. I don't know what the plans of the IDF are, if that's what you're asking, but clearly it will come in our hands, as well as the two shvatim that I mentioned in the east. Those also have to come back to us, and we have to bring back all of the Jews that are lost around the world, to bring back those shvatim to their proper nachlas.
You know, it's interesting because you can look at it the same way that you brought everything out. You said that we have to do things in order to bring Moshiach. So you can say on some level that here Hashem gave this opportunity. He said here. And do we have the vision to be able to say, we can say the same type of thing. Do we have the vision to say, okay, I get it, I see it, right? We're not gonna give this away. I understand that this is part of the prophecy of what Hashem is giving us. Can we as a nation see it and be able to hold on to it? Do you see what I'm trying to say? It's the same thing.
And some of our leadership, what they call leadership today,
I know,
are actually have a very special position. I don't know if you're aware of it, but Bibi Netanyahu is a Levi, as well as the Ramatkal, the chief of staff of the IDF, is also a Levi, and they have the not only the obligation to do certain things also in the Mikdash and also outside the Mikdash, but we know the story of Shimon and Levi and their role in fighting wars for the Jewish people. What happened in Shechem with Dinah, and listen, we hope that again, I don't want to go too far into this. We actually have a whole flock of sheep and goats across the street here. We purchased before the Pesach, getting ready for the Korban Pesach. Yes, that's a thing today. People actually can bring the Korban Pesach. The Chassam Sofer actually has a whole tshuva about it, which he was asked by his father-in-law, the Rebbe Kiva Eger, whether it would be permissible to bring the Korban Pesach today. And he writes a whole tshuva explaining all the reasons why you would think that you cannot bring the Korban Pesach today. He refutes all these reasons. Again, it's a longer conversation. He refutes all the reasons, and he concludes by saying that, yes, we can bring the Korban Pesach theoretically today, but unfortunately, the Ottoman Turkish Sultan will not give us access to the Mokom HaMizbeach, to the only place where we can bring korbanos, and therefore it's not practical today because we don't have access to the Mokom HaMizbeach. If you replace the Ottoman Turkish Sultan with Bibi Netanyahu, we have the same issue today. We have leadership that doesn't have the backbone yet. We hope that it's going to change in the next month, but we are hoping that we can bring a Korban Pesach. It's been 60 years that I don't know if people are aware of this, but for the first year after 1967, the Lubavitcher Rebbe told all of his Hasidim not to be in Yerushalayim, that they had to all leave Yerushalayim on Erev Pesach, because if you're not aware, there's two positive commandments. I should have prefaced it with this. There are only two positive commandments, mitzvahs aseh, in the Torah, that one is chayiv kares, if one does not do them. One of this is the Korban Pesach, and the other is Bris Milah. So the Lubavitcher was afraid that now that they've gotten back the Har HaBayis, and we're not going to bring the Korban Pesach, all those people are going to be chayiv kares for not bringing the Korban Pesach. A couple years went by, and he realized that even though we theoretically have the Har HaBayis, we're not really showing our sovereignty over it, and therefore he allowed them to be in Yerushalayim on Erev Pesach. But we take it very seriously. We're here, and we hope that again we'll have leadership which will allow us to bring the Korban Pesach this year. We check each of the sheep for mumim. We're not makdish them, but we check them all for mumim. We have chaburas for each one, and we have it prepared for the immediate. By the way, again, going off on another tangent. I'm sorry, I'm ADHD. But I can tell you that the karbanos can only be brought by Jews on the Makom Mizbeach. Since there's an Isser of Bamos that we're not allowed to bring karbanos anywhere in the world except for the Har HaBayis behind us. But that is not true for non-Jews. In fact, the Rambam says very clearly that non-Jews are allowed to bring korbanos outside of the Makom Mikdash. And in fact, we taught a non-Jew, this might be shocking to people to hear, but you can look it up in the Rambam, it's very clear. We taught a non-Jew how to bring a korban, which we're allowed to do. And he brought a korban a couple years ago here on Har Hazeisim. There was a non-Jew that brought a korban, and there was a great rabbi that was the first speaker at that event, and the rabbi said, "You should know something. You should know if something happened, and I found out, right? Hypothetically, I found out that I'm not Jewish. And somebody told me, your grandmother converted. It wasn't a proper conversion. You're actually not Jewish." He said he would run to the Beis Din to be megayer, to convert. But he said that on his way, he would stop and he would bring a korban. Because there's certain things that non-Jews are able to do that we as Jews are not able to do. They may not be aware of it, they might not know it, but they're literally able to bring korbanos today. We're not able to bring korbanos. He says that on the way to run to the Beis Din to convert, he would make sure to stop and bring a korban. Anyways, I'm sorry. I don't know if I answered your question or not, but that's my tangents.
Okay, Sarah Malkat, do you want to ask? Do you want to ask? You want to ask some?
Yes. What is it about Italy? There's a webinar later today about the history of Purim in Italy, and then you mentioned Italy during your talk.
I'm not sure what your question is. Can you?
Does anybody else understand? Like, why Italy? Is there something about the history of Judaism in Italy that it was mentioned in your talk? And then again, there is a webinar being offered live later today about the history of Purim in Italy. So why is Italy being talked about? And it's like not the history of Purim anywhere else. Or is there nothing in particular about Italy?
So first of all, I love your name. I have a daughter named Sarah Malka. So
okay.
So it's a great name. And very apropos to Purim as well, because there's a Sarah and a Malka. It says in the Gemara a very interesting thing. I don't know if this is where you're headed, but it says in the Gemara that the Moshiach will be found at the gates of Rome. Some people translate it as Rome. Some people think that Rome is a place here in Eretz Israel. It's disputed exactly what that means. But there is a connection, some sort of connection to Italy. The Italian Jews have very fascinating traditions. They were not affected by persecution up until World War II. They weren't affected by persecution like many other European Jews were. So their traditions are very perhaps more pure than others because they didn't have all that persecution that everybody else had. And I could tell you another thing that when I was in Sicily, it's actually a fascinating thing that in Sicily they have the oldest mikvah in all of Europe. It's not used today, but there was a woman who purchased a property in Sicily in an area that was traditionally had Jews in it. And she started to renovate it to build a hotel, and they started digging down in the ground. They found these mikvos that are ancient mikvos. Fascinating. Also, there, of course, is the Vatican. The Vatican. It is legend that there are kalim in the Beis Hamikdash. It's connected to Purim, I guess. The kalim that were used in the Suda of Achashverosh. They are legend to be kalim that exist today in the Vatican. I don't know if they are. In fact, I'm pretty sure that anything of serious value is not there today. We believe that many things like the menorah, at the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, there were many menorahs. At least one of them we know from the Arch of Titus was taken with the Romans back to Rome. We believe that these very expensive gold kalim were melted down and were used to fund the building of the Colosseum in Rome. I guess there's a lot to speak. I'm not a historian, so you'll have to listen to the next webinar to understand what the connection. I'm not sure what the connection. I was just throwing out different ideas that have to do with Italy and.
Well, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Esty, you want to ask a quick question? Esty? Esty, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll ask quickly, I hope succinctly. And I say this with respect. Thank you so much for everything. You're an amazing human being. We're privileged. Why would it be, I hope it comes out right out of my mouth, let's say Rav Feinstein, that important topic happened on Shabbos, and I'm not talking about conspiracy theories, just in general, what was coming across, so I understand they don't want it. What came across is that it shouldn't be publicized because it would create a panic, right? In the guns, everyone chutz la'aretz, we have to leave, and this is mentally can throw people off. And of course, Rabbanim have to be very, very cognizant of that. But you mentioned at Tzaddik that you asked something and you didn't mention his name. And it's like, why are things then, if Gedolim that we have, and we say every generation has what it needs, they want to do right by us, their children, right? They're our leaders. So
Esty, are you
why
asking
is it
why they're not telling?
Because he said whoever's left
the
behind.
Jews of Chutz La'aretz, why are they not telling the Jews of Chutz La'aretz to? Well, I think
Right.
Rav Kanievsky did tell the Jews of Chutz La'aretz to come. I think he did, but I think that most of the tzaddikim understand that most will not listen. I think a lot of, I know Rav Arush has said something. I know there's a lot of different big Rabbanim who have spoken about coming to Eretz Yisrael. It's just, if someone as Rav Kanievsky said it, there was a video of it, right? Then we understand that it's a very difficult thing for most people to hear, and maybe there's an inyan. Maybe there's an inyan that they don't want to, put people in a position where they're not listening. I don't know. Josh, what do you think?
Well, I'll tell you, we host seminary girls on Shabbos. Many years we've been hosting over 1,000 seminary girls in our home. And it is not uncommon for the seminary girls after a Shabbos with the Wander family to get this crazy idea in their head that Jews belong in Eretz Yisrael. I'm not sure where they get it from, but they sort of get that message over Shabbos. And often there's a girl that raises her hand at the end of the Shabbos and says, but our rabbis say we don't have to go to Eretz Yisrael. And I've struggled with that question for many years because I am not going to be the one to tell an impressionable 18, 19-year-old seminary girl that she shouldn't listen to her rabbis. And I was never sure exactly how to answer this question. So for some time, we had a radio show here in Eretz Yisrael talking about Aliyah. And one week I had a guest speaker who was a rabbi in Beit Shemesh, a friend of mine, Rabbi Danny Myers, if you know who he is. And it was right after Shabbos, and I just had this question brought up to me. So I said to him, you know what should I tell the girls that ask this question? But our rabbis say we don't have to live in Eretz Yisrael. And he said, tell them like this. And I use this to this day. He said, tell them that they always have to listen to their rabbis. That is a fundamental of our faith, is listening to our Masorah, to our rabbis. But he said that there's one exception to that rule, and one exception only. And that exception is when it comes to moving to Eretz Yisrael. He says, why? Why would there be an exception to the rule? So he says, if you look throughout Jewish history, there's a theme. From the Meraglim, who were the Nesiim, who were the heads of the generation, to the Olei Bovel, to the heads of Bovel, that all the Gedolim stayed in Bovel. They didn't come with Ezra. They didn't listen to Ezra and Nehemiah and come back to Eretz Yisrael. To the Holocaust. He says there's a theme throughout Jewish history over and over and over again, that you see that if there's one time that the rabbis always make a mistake, it's when it comes to moving to Eretz Yisrael. So he said, if there's one time that you're going to ask more questions of your rabbis, is when it comes to this point, because that's when you see that they always make their mistakes. You see that throughout Jewish history. So that is the point. The point is that there are rabbis, very holy rabbis around the world, and many of them are doing holy work. I have used the services of Chabad in cities around the world on different speaking tours and different times I've been traveling. And I've had the opportunity to speak in a number of Chabad communities. So a number of years ago, I spoke in a community in America, and the rabbi got somewhat defensive about my words about Aliyah. And he got up after me and he said, you know, my dream is to live in Eretz Yisrael. I want nothing more than to live in Eretz Yisrael. He said, but what could I do? He said, the Rebbe used to always tell us a mashal. He used to say that when a ship is sinking, the last one to get off the ship is the captain of the ship. His job is to stay behind and make sure everyone is safe. He says, we're shluchim of the Rebbe. Our job is to be the captains of the ship. That is our job, to stay behind in Gaulus and make sure everyone's safe. So I got up after him. I said, I want to commend you and your family on your Mesiras Nefesh, real Mesiras Nefesh, that you're willing to be on this sinking ship. I said, meanwhile, the real job of a captain of a ship when it's sinking is to make sure that everybody gets off the ship. I said, if you're not getting everybody off the ship, then you're not doing your job. That's the question. Are the rabbis really getting people off the ship? What I can tell you is that there are many rabbis that if you speak, two things I'll tell you. First of all, there are many rabbis that if you speak to them privately, you may hear something very differently than if you speak to them publicly. And the second thing is that depending on how you ask the question, you may get a very different answer. That if you're looking for an excuse not to move to Israel, there are many heterim for that. That's not a problem. In fact, many years ago, I said that I had the perfect idea, which was going to make millions of dollars. In those days, it was a computer program. Today, it would be an app on your phone. And the idea was like this. You type in your halachic query, whatever shaila you have, and then you type in the answer you want to get, and it tells you which rabbi to go see. Everybody would buy this program because that's unfortunately what many people do. People shop around for the answers they want to get. If the answer is that you don't want to live in Eretz Yisrael, it's not hard to find a heter not to live in Eretz Yisrael. But if you really do want to live in Eretz Yisrael, and that's how you approach your rabbi, saying, I understand this is a mitzvah, a very important mitzvah, a mitzvah that's compared to all the mitzvahs in the Torah. And we understand how a unique time that we're living in. And we want to move to Eretz Yisrael. Can you give us encouragement? Can you help us move? That's a completely different story than if you come and say, Nebuch, I have to move. It seems to me from this parsha Lech Lecha that we're not supposed to be here. What can I do?
I think, Josh, what she's trying to also ask you is more than that. She's trying to say that, okay, if the Jews are in sakana, in Chutz La'aretz on some level, right? And the Rabbanim, the tzaddikim are guides and are whatever, then why aren't they, and if they know this from Ruach HaKodesh, why aren't they saying to the Jewish world, you know what, maybe. So I want to just, before you answer, I just want to say what I think. So if you look at the times of the Holocaust, the greatest tzaddikim were led into the gas chambers, right? You can ask the question, how was that possible? How was it hidden from them what was going to happen? That they too were going to be led into the gas chambers, right? That's number one. Number two, you can also say that the tzaddikim, very few tzaddikim got out, and most of their communities didn't get out because when they were warned, they didn't believe it. They didn't believe it, and they thought that it's going to be okay. It's not possible. And we see that, Rabbi Pinchas Winston gives this mashal. He said, when you look at Yaakov, right, he is the last one that understood. When he heard the brothers speaking that he stole and it was their wealth and they were taking his wealth, all of a sudden he understood that the Shekhina was no longer going to be in this place and it was no longer going to protect him, and he had to get out as quickly as possible because he understood when he heard that it's always there. That thing against us is always there, but when the Shekhina is there, it protects us. So he says that was the last time that the Jews ever understood to get out on time, that no generation since has been able to leave on time. So, I'm going to let Josh answer it, but, the question is, you know, and I think it's all of us. And I understand it's not easy. Nothing's easy. It's not easy. And I'm the first one to say that. But I think also that people want to hear the rabbis on some level say, you don't have to do it, right? Because it is a hard thing to do. It's lech lecha. It's mamish lech lecha. On some level, it's lech lecha. And, you know, it's that's what it is. And so why? We don't know. Why were they wrong during the times of the Holocaust? Why did Hashem not reveal to them what was going to happen? Right? Why did Hashem not reveal it to them? We don't know those things. We don't. And maybe it's what he said, that Hashem doesn't take our Bechiras Choshit away, no matter what. Go ahead, Joshua. Go ahead.
Rav Moshe Feinstein, who was considered to be the Gadol Ador, perhaps the last Gadol Ador in our times in America, part of a tshuva where he was asked the question about moving to Eretz Yisrael. This is many years ago, obviously. He was asked the question, and he comes up with a unique idea that there's a difference between a mitzvah chiyuvis and a mitzvah kiyumis. According to Ramosha, everybody understands that it's a mitzvah. Anyone who moves there, it's a mitzvah. They're makayim a mitzvah. But it's not what he calls a mitzvah chiyuvis. It's not a mitzvah that obligates one to do. Like tzitzis, one who is not obligated technically to wear tzitzis. If a man is wearing a four-cornered garment, then he is obligated to put tzitzis on them. But he's not obligated to put the four-cornered garment on in the first place. We do it because we want to perform mitzvahs, which is part of the answer, right? We want to perform as many mitzvahs as we can. We understand that that is our goal. And therefore, it should be a no-brainer that the place where you can perform all the mitzvahs is where we belong. But there was a rabbi, a very special rabbi, Rabbi Shalom Gold, Zichron Levracha, here in Har Nof, who said that this really shows the godless of Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe could have said, one is obligated to move to Eretz Yisrael. And he would, first of all, have said something which he knows that most people would not have listened to. And you're not allowed to say things that no one's going to listen to you. But even more importantly, he says that is actually takes away the Bechira Chofshis that a person has. As long as a person is told, this is the halacha, you have to move to Israel, you have no other way to do it. You're stuck. That you've literally taken the Bechira Chavshis away from the person, whether he likes it or not, has to move there to Israel. But when you've allowed that opportunity where a person can make choices, people can choose whether this is the right thing for them now or not, that opens up the opportunity for more schar, that they can get more reward, that in the end, they could be the ones that are choosing to move there to Israel. It's not something that they're obliged to do, but something that they have chosen to do. Like nobody says, nobody says it's easy. It says Davka the opposite. It says that Eretz Yisrael is niknes b'yisurim. It's one of the things that is acquired through hardships. That, along with two other things, which are Torah and Eretz Yisrael and Olam Haba. Nobody says we shouldn't be after Torah. We shouldn't be going after Torah and Olam Haba. But for some reason, some people have issues with Eretz Yisrael, the Eretz Yisrael one. Again, I'm not speaking to everybody. I'm speaking in generalizations because I believe that everybody is in a unique situation. Right. And everybody has to deal with that unique situation that they're in and see. Like there was actually a case that I was presented with recently in which a man called me. I shouldn't give too many details, but a man called me and said a story that his wife lives in Israel. His wife lives in America. All his children live in America, and he wants a rabbi to speak to his wife to convince her that she has to get up and leave. Right? They live apart, and he travels back and forth, and he can't do it anymore. And mitzvahs, I say positive mitzvahs. The halacha is that one is allowed only to spend up to 1/5 of their wealth in order to perform a positive mitzvah. A negative mitzvah, with somebody, a low sasa, if somebody's not allowed that, you can add pikuach nefesh until it gets the pikuach nefesh. You're supposed to give everything. But mitzvahs I say you only give 1/5. I said if your wife is important to you and your children are important to you as 1/5 of your wealth, then you should reconsider this putting your wife and your children in this predicament. Not everybody's ready to move, and that's a lot of it has to do with education. Unfortunately, there are many communities around the world that just were not brought up. And I was in one of these communities. I learned in yeshivas, which were not Zionists, what they call Zionist yeshivas. I went to Haredi yeshivas. And we were never taught about the centrality of living in Israel. We weren't taught this, how important it is to live here, how it's not a question of being obligated or not obligated. We weren't taught even why it's important. In fact, that's what one of the goals, our mission statement of my organization, Bring Them Home, is not to compete with Nefesh B'Nefesh. Nefesh B'Nefesh, I always tell people, deals with the how you should make Aliyah. It deals with the logistics. Once you've decided to make Aliyah, it tells you how you should go about it. But before you get to the how stage, you have to get past the why stage. And most people don't even know why they should be making Aliyah. So they're never going to be calling up Nefesh B'Nefesh and asking how we should do it if we don't know why we should be making it. And unfortunately, throughout the educational system of America, in many institutions, yeshivas, Beis Yaakovs, they do not teach this why you should be living in Eretz Yisrael. It's sort of something that's not addressed for whatever reasons. I learned, I don't know if I should say the story or not, but I learned in high school in Eretz Yisrael in Baltimore. And even at my young age in high school, I already figured out that that Jews are supposed to live in Eretz Yisrael. It became obvious to me to just learning the parasha. And I approached one of the rabbis at the time, and I said, how could it be that we're here? Shouldn't we be in Eretz Yisrael? And I was given a lecture for an hour as to why Eretz Yisrael is not important right now, and our concentration needs to be on Torah. We have to focus on Torah. Eretz Yisrael is not something we should be concerned about today. I think he was mistaken, and rabbis make mistakes. We learned this from the greatest of all rabbis. Moshe Rabbeinu, we know, made mistakes. Rabbis can make mistakes. It happens. That again, I'm not going into ways of Hashem and why Hashem keeps it hidden from the rabbis of the Holocaust and why today the rabbis don't understand this and they're not speaking about it. All I can say is that rabbis sometimes can make mistakes, and we have to be very careful. I'm fortunate enough to have a rabbi, Rav Hershel Shechter, who has taught us. It's taken me many years to figure this out. He's been my Rebbe for over 40 years. He was my Besada Kedushin. When I went to ask my Rebbe a question in my younger years, he would never give me the answer. That was the way of the Soloveitchik family. That's the way of the brisk. That's when you approach and you ask a shaila to the rabbi, he doesn't say this is the halacha. He says there's this rishon, there's this acharon, he goes through the sugya. He explains through all the different opinions. Go learn the sugya, go figure it out what the halacha is. That's not my job to tell you what to do. It took me many years to figure out that if I really want to know an answer from him, I have to say, what would Rebbe do if he was in this situation? What would he do? Sometimes we need that kind of advice also. But the idea that at a certain point, we have to use our own brains. We have to use our own understanding of what the Torah is. We can't rely everything on someone else to make our decisions for us. And we have to learn the sugya. We have to learn from scratch. Again, you have to know what you're talking about. You can't just it's not a guessing game. It's not what we feel like. It's not an emotional game. You have to learn from scratch the sugya, what the Torah says, what the Gemara says, what the Tanoim, the Amoraim, the Rishonim, the Achronim. You have to learn all the sugya, and then you have to make a decision of what's right to do. Of course, you can consult with your rabbis. But again, when you're going to your rabbis with this knowledge, already understanding what the sugya is, and you ask them the question from that perspective, you're going to get a very different answer than if you blindly go to your rabbi and say, should we just all pick up and move to Eretz Yisrael tomorrow? That's generally frowned upon because there are consequences to moving to Eretz Yisrael, especially with a family, and not knowing where you're going to go and what your parnasa is and where your children are going to be educated. Again, I think it's the right decision for 99% of Jews in the world to do, and this is what our organization. By the way, if you go to our website, which people have written on the chat, Bring Them Home. You can also go to itstimetolive.com or getoutnow.org. Takes you to the same place. We have hundreds of videos of prominent Rabbanim and Rebbitzin speaking about the centrality of Eretz Yisrael, importance of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael today. We have our radio show. We have a podcast. We have lots of information over there. you're welcome to go check it out and to learn the sugya, and then come with and ask an educated question of your rabbis, not just a question out of the blue.
Okay, Josh, this was amazing. Thank you. It's really late. Thank you so much.
There's
This
so
was
much to
really,
discuss.
really
I
amazing.
can't. All I can
know.
say
We'll
is
do it. We'll do it again, Mirch Hashem. We'll do it again.
all I
Thank
can
you
say
so
is
much.
this
This was really unbelievable. You know what? You want there to be, you know what I mean? Better to do it in small increments than, and you know, so but
hopefully that gave you a taste and again and whetted your appetite to understand that there's lots of things that are going on. Maybe you'll open your eyes a little bit more when you dive into Sechazen Aneno. You'll have in mind that to open your eyes to the Gaula, and b'schus noshim tzidkonios. It's in your schus that we were nigal from Mitzrayim, and the Gaula is. By the way, when I speak in many venues, I find that the men are much harder to convince than the women.
Right. Than the women.
The women in the audience need to approach their husbands and their children, and they have to take their role as a woman to try to convince them to do the right thing. Yeah.
Amen. Thank you, Josh. Thank you so much for everything you do for Am Yisrael. Really, thank you so much. This was
Pleasure.
amazing.